Welcome to The Broken Chat. The Broken Chat is a masterful mashup of the Broken Brain podcast and the Let's Chat podcast, spoken to you secretly behind the paywall walls of Patreon. Hello, you're a patron of the Let's Chat with Chris Revel podcast? You're a patron of The Broken Brain? Well, if not one of those, then you're some kind of dirty, rotten pirate sneaking around stealing things, and for which, I'll be honest, you have my grudging respect. But for the other two categories, you have our undying love, as Chris and myself, that's D, get together every month to talk about podcasts and pop psyculture and pop psychology and whatever else we get to talking about. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to get into it right about now.
Recording in progress.
This is, of course, our Broken Chat Zeitgeist episode, so with a very special emphasis. First of all, how are you doing? That's the first special emphasis, is how is Chris?
Yeah. That's pretty good, right? Yeah,
that's excellent. That's what I was hoping to hear.
It's a very warm, rainy, cloudy, gloomy day in Rhode Island. The day after Veterans Day, we're recording it, which I was off yesterday, and now it's like weird because like you get the day off and you're like, oh, back to work on Friday. So it's kind of
weird. It's weird to get the day off on a day before the weekend or whatever.
Yeah,
that's Friday. And that's what that is. I couldn't.
Yeah.
Remember,
yeah. So it's a little. I won't get into all the complaints about my company, but yeah. So it's a little weird.
That's our special. So for you Patreon listeners, you get to hear Chris talk shit on his company.
Yeah. How are you?
Wait, your boss is a new donor. I forgot to tell you. Oh, man.
Oh, man. Well, if I knew who my boss was, that would be helpful.
No, I'm doing okay. I was excited to talk to you about this. There was a few things in this episode that I had forgotten about. And I guess I should say, too, for everybody listening, this we're going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 10 of The West Wing. Noel. Yeah. And I had remembered this. You brought it up when you were on my show recently, talking about the PTSD and your experiences and things. Where should we start? Should we summarize? If anybody out there hasn't heard this episode of The West Wing, and you just happen to be a Patreon subscriber who's getting this, I guess,
thank you.
We could, yes, thank you for being here, for being that person, that special person that you are. Never change. Do what you want, but I don't want to tell you how to live your life.
Right.
Should we give a little summary? Yeah.
I would love, maybe a little summary, because I know we're not going to be good at staying on track and following the episode. But
exactly, we can just make a brief summary. Anybody can go watch it if you have HBO Max, or it's about $3 on Amazon Prime to watch one episode of The West Wing. Just so you know, those are the two things I'm familiar with. I know there's other ways to watch things online, but I don't know what they are.
Me neither, to be honest. And and if you're really wanted to get a better analysis of this episode after this, you listen to this, I'd recommend going back to the West Wing Weekly podcast hosted by Richie Hirway and Josh Molina from the West Wing, and they do an incredible in-depth analysis of this episode and all the episodes. I'm a huge fan of that podcast.
Yeah.
It's actually since ended, but it's all still out there.
Cool.
So the quick recap of anyone for the West Wing. This takes place season 2 after few episodes after the shooting that occurred at Jed Bartlett at the great finale of season 1, and it starts off with Josh going to meet a traumatologist, which I wanted to ask you, is that a real word?
I have never heard of that before.
Sure,
I was like, traumatologist? That sounds like one of those. I didn't look it up, but that sounds like one of those things that they put on a show. Sort of like how the protagonist of the Da Vinci Code, whatever his name is a
symbologist.
Symbologist, which is also bogus. It's made up. There's no such job.
Which, personally, I don't really mind. Like I'm aware this is a fictional TV show, and sometimes you have to, not everyone watching this episode has a background in behavioral health, so totally fine. But he meets with it's Adam Arkin, I believe. Great character in
Adam
this
Arkin,
episode.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Adam. And yeah, we see him again in the later seasons. And so it's kind of a recap of Josh has an injury on his hand, and he basically needs to get him to tell him what happened. Josh is really not aware that he's ill, and the entire plot is lots of just kind of back and forth of what happened. It's set at Christmas time, which is it's one of the beautiful episodes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it won an Emmy for set decoration for this episode.
Oh, I won't correct you. I'm not sure.
Yeah, beautiful episode. And then the B storyline is CJ and a woman at the White House sees a painting that used to hang in her house, and CJ and the art person at the White House have to kind of decide to talk to the French government and give it back to her, which is a really great storyline. And it just shows Josh kind of dealing with symptoms of PTSD. And one of the better themes, I think, is actually more about like friendship with Leo and understanding workforce. My God. And truly, I've watched this episode many a times. I'm sure I've watched it since I've had PTSD, but it hit different. I don't know. I've done a lot of that inner work, you'd call it, and especially after our episode that we recorded. Which thank you for everyone who listened to that. That's really something. That really means a lot to me. It definitely hit me way different. Like it made me very emotional, and it's such a good episode.
Yeah, very good one. I don't know about the Emmy thing. I did Google traumatologist because I didn't want to be talking out of my ear or whatever. It looks like there is such a thing as a psychological traumatologist, a professional care provider who offers clinical counseling services for trauma survivors. There's also, however, the same term is also used for a fellowship-trained orthopedic surgeon who specializes in complex fractures. So they're both the same name.
Yeah,
anyway,
one of my a good friend of ours has her PhD in trauma. What's
cool.
weird with your friends? You actually kind of know less about them. If you ever see that meme, it's like, oh my God, to my best friend, oh my God, how's work? By the way, what do you do?
Yeah.
So I can't even tell you what her PhD is. And I always would jokingly call her a traumatologist, thinking that wasn't a real word, but she does much more complex stuff. And shout out Lily Chansina. We love you to death. She's a great human being. And it's very funny. But yeah, so I guess for me, I'm just more interested in your thoughts about this particular episode with as a therapist of like, I think I got a lot of stuff right. I think I got a couple things wrong, which I can forgive.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to find a dramatic way to do it. Also, though, I thought a lot of things. I thought that a lot of things actually rang pretty true to me in some ways. One of the very first things that you see in the episode is he definitely doesn't want to be there, and Bradley Whitford, who plays Josh, nails the nonverbal communication. And I'll say I've worked in mental health care for a long time, and I've worked with a lot of people who are there to some extent against their free will. Let's say maybe
court
mandated?
For
a lot of people it's I worked with court mandated treatment, and people don't want to be there. They've got the threat of jail hanging over them. I have worked with some people who are going through kind of what Josh is going through, which is a sort of fit to work analysis, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Same
here.
In there,
currently,
you have a lot of that, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, the program I currently work in, we don't work with court mandated, but everyone I do work with is here voluntarily. But yes, I've also had a lot, and I've worked with plenty of people who think who want to drive their own treatment, which I love that stuff, to be quite honest. I love a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
that's the thing. Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
As I like that his the Adam Arkin's character, Stanley, can't remember the last name of the doctor. I just remember he kept calling him Stanley. I thought it was interesting how he comes off as real cash at first, and then Josh lashes back at him with the thing. It was the thing you texted me the other day that I didn't recognize because I hadn't watched the episode yet. It's like, you're not dealing with the paper boy.
Like with no context at all, I just texted you, and you're just like, "What?"
I was like, "What?"
I was like, "How do you not remember a line from an episode from 20 years ago that we weren't just talking about?"
I thought
we weren't even having a conversation. It was just out of the blue. You just saw you're not dealing with the paperboy.
I thought that you were referencing Atlanta, the show Atlanta, which is the name of
good call. Paperboy.
Yeah. So I was trying to remember. Well, gee, have we talked about the show Atlanta? When's the last time I watched an episode of Atlanta? So anyway, that was the more memorable Paperboy reference for me. But when he says to him, I thought it was really interesting how specifically they have Josh. He starts listing his resume, which is a very resistant, threatened guy behavior. Let me go ahead and tell you who I am. And let me tell you, I manage 1,100 people and I report to the president of the United States. And I know who you are. And, and he makes a big deal of the fact that he kind of caught what he calls a lie, that the doctor said, this is my colleague. She's here training. And he's like, well, actually, she is here training. But, he's like, yeah, but you lied to me because the implication is she's just here observing. But there's two of you to make sure that someone's always with me in case I'm suicidal. But you didn't tell me that. And
which I don't know. In your job, I've never worked anywhere with that kind of budget.
Yeah, no, me neither.
But I also understand this is for the TV show, so it's not.
Well, and also, I mean, I get, and I'll tell you too, this character, for those that don't remember, this character, Dr. Stanley Tucci, I think his name is. No, that's the actor. But anyway,
the actor, yeah.
He makes another appearance in the series, if you remember. He actually, they bring him in to talk to the president. Kind of like low key, don't tell him why he's there. And at some point, I remember this because I was thinking about it when it came to billables. The president asks him, how much do you make an hour at this job? And I can only assume he's talking about private practice. And he says $350 an hour. And I was like, holy shit.
I'm in the wrong field.
Wow. And so, but then again, I thought about it and thought, the guy who you'd get to see the president is probably one of these guys who is the director of that trauma center for the whole nation. He's probably written several books. He's probably also a college professor. So if you get to bend his ear for an hour of private practice, you're probably shelling out $350.
Yeah, my good friend Margie, who is the co-owner and CEO of the Interview Connections, the podcast booking agency, the premier podcast booking agency. She's a friend and a business mentor of mine, but she kind of was helping me kind of work through like money mindset kind of stuff, and she's kind of telling me it's like you're not charging people for the work you're doing; you're basically charging for the work you've done.
Yeah.
So it's like, exactly everything you said. It's like it's $350 an hour for an hour, but that's because this man has put in his life's research. Like, you're
yes.
So I thought that was right.
So
so
anyway,
that makes sense. That's kind of low then for him.
But one of the things that I thought was actually really cool was that you could make them. You could watch the episode and just say, wow, this guy's a real hard ass, because he really totally is. However, you got to remember, for me, I really took notice of how he started the interview. He started the interview casually and was like, yeah, call me Stanley if you want. You can call me, you don't have to call me doctor or anything. Whereas, and I can imagine that in the fictional world there, if Josh had matched his energy and been like, yeah, sure. Yeah, I want to figure this out too. I'm really casual also. I think you would have seen a different interview. Now, it's, of course, more entertaining for it to be adversarial. But the fact that he shifted his tone and matched Josh's energy, I thought that was fairly well performed.
Because, I totally agree.
Yeah, because and that also ties in with at the end when Josh says, "I want to do more therapy," and he's like, "Great, I'll help you find someone you like," and he's like, "But I like you," and it's like he likes him because he gave what he got, right? Yep. There's a little bit of that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the first rule of interviewing as a host. You always match guest interview energy, and that's also something we both do in our work too. It's like we always have a saying: you meet people where they're at. Yeah. So like if someone comes in and I'm like, "Hey, how are you?" and that tone isn't responded back, I change my posture and my body movements, and I change my tone. Like I do the same. I definitely I always kind of start off with a high energy, and not everyone wants that. So I can dial it up and down.
I remember this has happened to me a couple times, but I'm sort of probably remembering a composite of several people. But someone who I used to meet with was the most chill guy. The one that I'm remembering in particular is the most chill guy that I've ever talked to. And it was almost relaxing just to talk to him, that kind of a chill vibe. But I do what you just said. Like I didn't realize at first that I just sort of naturally fell into mirroring his energy, and it would just be, we'd be talking and really not a lot of even gestures, which I usually gesture and move around a little more when I talk.
Yeah.
And we just kind of would just be so mellow and chill. And it was really cool. But after he left, I found that I had to like sit up and stretch and go and shake out all of the sit still energy or whatever that had been suppressed. It was really interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, the first rule of de-escalation, a little tip for anyone out there: if someone is yelling at you, you whisper, because then they can't hear you. They have to lower their voice to get to you.
Yeah.
And so if someone's screaming at you, you'd be like, okay, I need you to calm down.
You
motherfucker.
Yeah,
Okay,
I used to do that.
I just need you to calm down.
When I worked in a residential center for kids, and they were very aggressive, they'd be in their room yelling through the door like, fuck you. And I'd be like, well, Jimmy, we're going to have to. What?
Take a breath.
Well, I just need you to calm down a little bit. What? I can't hear you. What did you say? Well, I just said you need to calm down.
Yep. Yeah. I've done a lot of that.
It was real interesting.
Yeah, this work definitely makes you get used to having your kid screaming in your face. Like sometimes Felicity will be doing something. I'm like, kids, don't even try. So, do you know what I've been through? Like, unless you're like sitting in a window with a knife to your throat with the police on their way,
we're gonna be
I ain't afraid of you.
Yeah, we're gonna be all right.
Yeah, like you. Sometimes I like make that joke to my wife, and she's like, "Did that really happen to you?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course. That hasn't happened to you."
What? You work at a job?
Like, oh, you've never had. Yeah, but So I've had some wonderful experiences. Actually, I really have.
Yeah. Well, as we get into, we're going to get into some of his triggers and things, but I wanted to hit on one thing real quick while we're still talking about the defensiveness. He said something a little later on. I wondered if some of his defensiveness might actually be related to something else, because part of his tone is he acts like there's a kind of like, this is beneath me. This is something I shouldn't be bothered with. Like this is something lesser than. And then later when he says, you have PTSD, he says, that doesn't sound like something that they let you work for the president if you have.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much, and then Leo at the end reaffirms him that if I have a job, you have a job. So I wonder how much of this was fear and shame at not being, like, air quotes, strong enough to not have this problem. How much of this was him thinking, I'm an important man, I shouldn't be struggling with this,
Of course. And I have to, man, I'm sorry. I see the show a lot, but I forget the timeline. But I think we've already learned about Josh and his past already in this. Is season 1 where they give him the card if something happens that he lives and nobody else does? Or does this come after this episode?
I don't remember that. So go ahead and say what that is.
What card? With Josh Lyman, there's an episode that give Josh a card. Let's say there's like a nuclear war, the president, where they need to get to a bunker, that he would be one of the people if there was like an end of the world scenario or something like that. And we find out that Josh, through the series, you find out that Josh's sister died in the fire, and he had blamed himself for his whole life.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
It's a continuing thing about Josh Lyman. It's part of his attachment issues with Donna. Not the fact that Aaron Sorkin never saw the chemistry, a lot of stuff, the fight with him and Toby. Like at the core, Josh has what I relate to is that like Superman syndrome.
Yes. Okay.
So he has a lot of issues with loss and losing people, and it's a great episode. He ends up giving the card back because he's like, if everyone else isn't going in, like Sam and CJ and the gang, I don't want to either. And so like I would actually probably argue. Of course, this is one episode of TV, but for Josh's character, he would probably have more of like more compound post traumatic stress based off, because they talk a lot about the sister later on. It's very or maybe it's earlier on throughout the series. It's really fascinating.
Well, and I think you run into a couple of things. Oh gosh, I don't even remember what year this came out in the 90s, and they weren't talking as much, even amongst a lot of professionals. I'll say you didn't hear as much discussion of complex or compound PTSD, right?
Yeah,
and you definitely didn't hear it on television. At that level, knowing what it was. But, you're absolutely right. I would say that there's a complexity there because of all of the trauma that he suffered in his life, that you see that too.
He has a lot of,
very
but,
interesting.
They would know that in this episode because he doesn't bring it up with Stanley, so that wouldn't be Stanley's fault. That would just be something would compound,
I
and the man
was he was pretty good. Stanley, pretty good at the one thing that comes up on a lot of depictions of psychological treatment, I always think is funny in movies and TV, is the like Sherlock Holmesian level of, it was the bell, whatever. It was like, it was the trigger. The trigger was, I got from your story that it was exactly this. Although, as I say that, it's funny because when you have a moment in real life that pops up, when you are talking to someone and all of a sudden you say something to them like, well, that must have been really hard for you because of that thing that happened. And they're like, how did you remember that? And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seemed pertinent. It just seemed to happen. So I'm not going to say that they never happen at all, but the level of assurance that he had when it was like, okay, here's what happened, getting into that trigger. And the trigger, I felt like they created the red herring, right, of what the trigger was the pilot. It's like, here's this pilot. He was exactly your age. He died, or at least had his same birthday. He didn't save his same year.
Yeah, the same birthday, and
suicidal.
He was healthy. This is gonna be, and I give that's more for television writing than therapy.
Oh, sure. And I think though, then when you see it, in the end, he's like, yeah, so what if another pilot, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, it wasn't the pilot. It wasn't the pilot. It was the band. It was. And then you look back and you realize the whole episode, what's he complaining about at work is the loudness, right? The loudness, the sounds. And doesn't he even at one point refer to the bagpipes as sirens?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then yep. And I will say I think they did portray that stuff really well.
Yeah.
I mean, as I'm talking, all I could think of is that scene when he's watching Yo-Yo Ma perform.
And you can see
Josh.
Yeah. His eyes, yeah.
On a film level, cinematography wise, there is some of the, oh my God, some of the camera movements that they use and the cut-ins and the fade outs to kind of do the juxtaposition from the different timelines of his stories with triggers are just absolutely gorgeous. Like there's that one scene where about the Yo-Yo Ma scene, and it's Josh, and it cuts into that scene and it comes back to Josh. But to get to Stanley, they don't cut. They just do like a full pull around the entire room right back to Stanley's face. Like they were just operating on another level when it came to cinematography on that series.
It's a great show. I mean, it really was. It was.
I'm gonna do a whole rewatch.
Yeah. And I always think of the hallway lights in the West Wing, how they have those little spotlights that they walk through in the hallways.
Yeah.
I'm always like, I want to go see if there's those lights in the West Wing, but yeah, they are excellent at the way they portray that, and it really came into play because what they were showing at that point, right, was all of the stuff that has been percolating in his mind is just starting to come out, and something about the music, something about the setting, and he's just having tears, and there's no real discussion except for him mentioning it to the psychologist in the present moment. But even that, they don't go too far into it. They just let you sit there with him and kind of feel that, I felt like it was very effective. What did you think, having had those kind of struggles and trauma symptoms?
Wasn't my experience as same as Josh, but I know everyone's is different. But God, that line when Stanley tells him, he's like, at the beginning, he's like, "There's something wrong with you and boiling, and you have no idea, and you blah blah blah." Like that one hit pretty hard. It's like, oh my God, that's so true. Like, because when you have post-traumatic stress, you don't know you don't realize that you're sick, or you're not aware that you're not well, essentially. Yeah. And you're very good at pushing that stuff down or away, or like I said in our episode, or to not think or talk about it. So you're not aware of it. And thankfully, if you're lucky, you have people in your life. Like in my case, was my wife, because of this episode, oddly enough. Hence why we're doing this episode.
You had said that it was.
Yeah.
That's why we wanted to talk about it. But yeah, she saw this episode of The West Wing and it triggered some realizations about how you were feeling.
Yeah. Oh, she's an obsessive West Wing fan. Before I met her, she watched it when it aired, so I watched it for the first time we watched. And but yeah, so I remember I couldn't move my neck. Like my back was really hurt. My top right was hurt. Pain goes to different part of the bodies and stuff like that. So I was like, I'll just get a massage. It's not normal to have. I did CBD. It's nothing unnormal to have joint pain, but it was to the point where I literally couldn't turn my head right. So I figured a professional massage should do the trick. So I went to get a professional massage, and it felt great, but the problem still persisted. So I was like, fuck, I go to the doctor and I go to the specialist. I don't know exactly what, why, or how, but then she was the one that mentioned that she made that reference point. I don't know why, but she did. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. It is interesting how those things tend to come together, I think, especially when you have a good support system.
Yeah. And God, how beautiful is this episode when Josh is like screaming at the president, but they're all aware that that's not like when Leo says, he's like, I don't think you were conscious in there. Like, because,
Yes.
Leo's in recovery, which I love that storyline. Like, I definitely can relate to that of having moments of not having consciousness. Like, I a lot of those. Mine were all by myself for the most part, outside of like night terrors. But like, I never had like the Josh experience. But yeah, different but similar. But it very much hit close to home. Where like I don't think Josh, or he plays it so well, he's not aware of it. Like, he doesn't know he's yelling. He doesn't realize he's saying sirens. He doesn't realize he's crying. And like, or for me, it was just like I'd be driving, and I would end up somewhere. I wouldn't know how I got there, and my face was wet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, huh, that's dangerous. I should really look into this. Nah.
Yeah. No, I loved that line of dialogue when he says, I don't think you were fully conscious in that room, or when you were saying those things.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really good, because one thing that you don't see depicted as much in a realistic way is disassociation, right? Is where he was disassociated, but yet he would not say he was disassociated because he was focused on the matter at hand. Like the content of the discussion, he was still living very much there.
Passionate.
Yeah, exactly. He even, after when they walk out, he's like, I should go back in there. At least I think the tone was, I need to apologize. Like he recognized I got carried away, but
he thought he was being passionate about the IMF.
Yes.
Treaty.
Exactly. And to have that level of outburst and then say to yourself, well, I got carried away. That's not actually accurate. And so you had the Leo character who, with his own background, was able to say, you were disassociated. I mean, he didn't say it that way, but it was like you totally disassociated to something else was going on, and it had nothing to do with what was going on in the room.
Yeah.
That's what it makes it hard to recognize, because it very much was the topic at hand, and it very much is a passionate environment. I'm sure in real life it is too, but especially as depicted in the show, they're always kind of yelling at each other, right?
Yeah, of course. At least that's how V portrays it, which it's my understanding it's pretty accurate. So
yeah.
But yeah, it was because I also my formal diagnosis was compound post-traumatic stress. It's still like, yeah, man, God damn it, this episode really hit hard. And like, and I remember having that feeling too. Like I think about that too. Like, what if I didn't know? And some of it, like, this episode really made me really emotional. I was like, really hit me hard. I was like talking to Terry, like, I don't know what would have happened if you didn't notice. And she's like, we would have figured it out. Something would have happened, but like, she never thought it would have gotten to that point. But that, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I have no clue. Like, what's to say that I wouldn't have become suicidal and acted on it? I hope not. But
I think
every person on Earth has that in their brain.
Sure,
we all have that.
So.
Yeah.
So.
We all have something that can make us suicidal or homicidal. But
and I don't. One of the
don't think it would have got there.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that I think is more common. It's more common than people completing a suicide, is that they, in some way or other, because they're not healthy, they sort of sacrifice their quality of life. Like that.
That's what I did.
Where if I could be if I'm just like drifting along at kind of a mediocre, traumatized, disassociating, depressed level, I'll never really, like, I'll have moments of fulfillment like everybody does, but life itself won't feel as happy. It'll just be kind of low-key miserable all the time. And why should anyone have to live that way? Right.
Well, you also don't know you're miserable until you're not miserable. Like, I remember going through therapy and everything and feeling much better from, first working through the PTSD, which was wonderful. And then like going back and figuring out all those other little traumas that led up to it and all these other types of things. And I was like, I never knew I wasn't feeling good. Even before the PTSD, I would say I was like a low level functioning, borderline kind of like depressed, dissociative person. But I thought that was normal, because you don't know you're not feeling well until you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I had a similar reaction when I started taking mood stabilizers. There were a lot of things that I enjoyed about the world and my life, but I just kind of had this low key feeling like you're just kind of like, yeah, the world just sucks, right? I mean, it just does. And it's not that it doesn't. I mean, there's a lot of things about the world that are pretty harsh, but when I am in a healthier place and I actually have treated, my underlying psychological illness, the world, it sucks a way lot less. In other words, That's a pessimist way of saying it, I guess. So I'll rephrase that and say it just doesn't. It's just not as bad as it seemed like. And there's a lot of difference between feeling like the world is a great place that has some problems and feeling like, well, the world is terrible and we all just get by. And when you're in that second mindset that I mentioned, then it just feels like a burden, but you don't know you're carrying it, as you put it.
Yeah, that was definitely me. And I was a big dissociative person. Like, definitely have used cannabis for many of years. Eating, like, some people, it's everyone. Sometimes it's food, sometimes it's drugs, sometimes it's sex, sometimes it's. I think workaholism is probably the biggest one that goes undiagnosed because you get a reward from that. I've definitely had periods of workaholism in my life and stuff like that, like stuff I look back and I'm like, not Brene Browning and leading in, really kind of blocking everything or the hard stuff. Yeah, they did such a good job in this episode. Like they really nailed it while also being an entertaining television program.
There's an element there. One of the other lines that I really, really enjoyed was when he says, "You need to remember without reliving." And I thought that's a really good, concise description of the kind of treatment, because you can't not remember. And to be honest, you may always have elements of regret or elements of fear. If you're involved in an incident like he was, you might always be a little more nervous about going to some public event.
Sure.
You might, you're never going to be like, I'm sure glad I got shot. I mean, once again, certainly there's the philosophy of accepting everything that's happened to us, but it can always be something that you kind of hate that it happened or totally hate that it happened, but it's not being.
That's me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're not like, boy, that was great what happened in the hospital.
No, it's the reason I don't want to have a second child.
Yeah.
And like that was like one and done. And if we're gonna do another one, well, there's other ways to do it, but there's no way. I would rather get a divorce and go on my way having Victoria be alive than go through that risk again. Like sometimes people do that thing when they try to be nice, but like, oh, aren't you glad it made you the person you are? I was like, nope. If I could do it all over again, I wish it never happened.
There's so many things, right? If I could flip a switch and that never happened, yep, I already flipped it. I didn't. Yep. I just flipped it because I thought it might make it not have happened while you were telling me that it would make it not have happened.
Or I hear people would always be they try to be sweet, but look, you got Felicity at the end, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I also would have liked to get her here without that happening. And so would Victoria, and so would Felicity, and so would our, and I know we can't change it. So I've come to that acceptance, but I absolutely wish it never happened.
And that falls under. We should do a whole episode about this sometimes, but that falls under one of the many things that this is true for, which is there are many things philosophically, spiritually, psychologically that make people feel better, but only if they are applied to one's self. Like I've met a lot of people who actually do. I believe they really do believe I'm grateful for my abuse because it made me who I am. However, I also think that it's a terrible mistake to turn around and say to someone else, you should be grateful for your abuse because it made you who you are. It's like, no. That only works if it applies to yourself. But people tend to turn around. Otherwise, comfort ends up being a weapon almost. It's like it's weaponized comfort. Someone comes at me and says, here's why you should feel better. And it's like, that doesn't necessarily help me. If it helps you, then great. But
good for you. Like, I'm grateful that things didn't get worse, but I wish it didn't happen. Well, it's like that whole thing in quantum mechanics, like two opposing viewpoints can simultaneously be true. Like, I'm grateful for that experience because it made me who I am, but I also wish it didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, So
I have to say, EMDR therapy too had made the staunch atheist open up to a level of spirituality I never thought I would exist, that I would have. And like, trauma is the closest thing to time travel you can have, because you're just like, you're literally like, you do feel out of body. Like, it's a really strange thing because, like, for me or for everyone, it's not that you're just remembering it. Your body is physically reacting, but like especially doing EMDR, when we get in that kind of like subconscious level or that dreamlike level, like that first exercise was having to go through, and it was like, tell me the smell. Like I'm not even kidding. Like it sounds so. I know it sounds woo woo BS, but I promise you this was my experience. But I literally went back to the moment, and I could put my feet into the ground. I was in the exact same clothes. I was touching the walls. I could smell the smells. Like it was like time travel. Like except my therapist, it's like it's time travel, but for the worst thing that's ever happened to you. Right. So what we need to do is be able to like let the memory process. We understand all that without having to relive it. But yeah, like it's. I mean, I literally had to have that moment multiple times, but like, and the time when I finally got to the place where I could do the proper EMDR for it was better because I had like, well, he's a therapist, but in the East, he would be considered a shaman, essentially, to like walk me through it. But yeah, I mean, I literally like, I know we talked about in your episode how different moments of that, but like I was in the room. And now when I think about it, it's just a memory. I'm like, oh, I think the floor was pink. I don't know. Like I remember the pictures. I have memories, but if you asked me before the trauma, I was like, it was a pink wall. There was this ducky blanket. This was the color of the furniture. This was who was working. I could smell this in the air. Felicity was where, I mean, I literally could like walk through the entire experience, except it's the worst experience I've ever had. So who'd want to do that? I wish we could do that for good stuff, but we can't, unfortunately.
Doesn't.
Well, you know what? Honestly, because there's so little we know about our brain, I guess theoretically that's possible for us to learn a way to train our brains to do that. But well, that's another day.
Sure. Yeah. That'd be pretty awesome.
That's all I want. It'd be awesome. Just not for trauma.
I wanted to mention something that hit me about the B plot, as you put it. You have this, what is her name? Cece, the news director, or the public affairs. What is her
CJ.
name? CJ.
CJ Craig.
Cece is, I guess, someone else that I'm remembering. Cece's Pizza Buffet. That's what I was remembering. Speaking of, things that don't exist anymore, The West Wing and Cece's Pizza. But
we don't have that out here. Cool. I
don't know where I remember it existing once upon a time, and it's a good excuse for me making that gaffe. But anyway, so CJ, the PR director, gets a question from some reporter that's like, "Hey, some lady freaked out or something on a White House tour, gosh." And that was my impression of that news person. So then she kind of investigates it, and they find, there's this painting that's hanging here, and this woman saw it, and she started freaking out, and they escorted her out of the building, which I can only assume is what happens if you're on a White House tour. We should try it, you and I, and see if see if the PR director calls us. So anyway, but they find out that this painting was like in France, and the president saw it and said, "That's a cool painting," and in France was like, "Here, take this painting." And it turns out it was sold. It went through many hands, I guess, but it was stolen by the Nazis from her father, essentially, right? I mean, her father was the artist, and she was a World War II survivor.
I thought her father was an art collector.
Or art collector. That's right.
Not very famous artist, essentially.
Something like that. Yeah. So the painting belonged to her father, right? And then, so they tracked her down, and she and her son show up. And I didn't catch what language she spoke. That she spoke a little English, but
it was like broken Slovakian. It almost sounded like.
There you go.
Like some Slavic, like a Slovakian-ish like region.
Yeah. So
like she's a French Jew, but then she doesn't speak French. Or her father is a French Jew. So
brother is a French Jew, right?
Maybe they might have even said the country. It might have been like Bulgaria or something.
Yeah, something like that. One of those European countries. Put that out there for everybody. Anyone out there, find it, tweet at us. So
yeah, please, actually, I'd love to know.
We could rewatch the episode, but that's not going to happen right now. So when they're talking to her, though, and they give her,
yeah. Hold on 1 second.
Yo, you
I have the do not disturb on my door, but let's jump back into it.
Oh my gosh! So working for a living. So they give her the painting, and they say, "We want you to have this." You seem to feel strongly about it when you freaked out at the other day. Whatever. They give it to her, and it's really sweet. But the thing that I was thinking about was, it's interesting how they worked in a B plot that also has to do with trauma, right? There's like a generational trauma and a direct trauma for her. And for her, there was this trigger where if you want to, I don't know for sure if she disassociated very, very similar to what happened to Josh in the Oval Office, you could say.
Well, they say that her father was killed in the Holocaust.
Right. Yes, exactly.
They say
I
very,
forgot to
very
mention that.
quickly,
Yeah.
very briefly, that he was a French Jew and he perished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've seen those, you see those specials they've done where they take people back to look at the war camp. Some people go back to sort of recapture that experience and to talk about how they feel. And it's really, I mean, just talk about trauma. So in a way, this plot also explored, and I felt like the first time that I had watched it, and to be honest, even after completing it, when I watched it for our discussion, it kind of escaped me at first. It was just a nice, sweet little story, but then I thought, hey, wait a minute, that was all about trauma as well, right?
Yeah.
That
a
was,
little tea.
Yeah, the little different, right? The trauma that she was suffering.
Yeah. Wow,
and the
that's
resolution
funny because
there. Yeah.
my takeaway was it made me think of that scene in Black Panther, and then you kind of realize that all artifacts and museums are stolen.
Yeah, that's true.
But I'm glad you went with a different way with that. I was like, oh yeah.
Do you ever?
Those weren't donated.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't donated. Do you ever seen James Acaster? He's a British comedian who has some Netflix specials. They're really, really worth it. But he does a whole thing about the British Museum of History, where he talks about how it's basically like, he said, as England, we just decided we were going to go on a shoplifting spree to the earth a long time ago.
Yeah.
And now when people come and say, we'd like you to give that back, we're like, nah, we're not done with it yet. We're still looking at it.
God, that's great.
Yeah, it's really good. He has a whole bit about that. That's definitely worth seeing. Some people should check out James Acaster on Netflix.
I will. I want to bring up too that I really noticed some great acting from Bradley Whitford with the inflection in his voice would change. With is it Adam Arkin?
Yes.
Him and Adams, but like specifically the one scene when he's talking about the Christmas party, and they kind of do like an overlay where you hear the music first, but you see Joe, and they're talking about Yo-Yo Ma, and he's like, "Was he good?" And Josh like kind of stares off into the space. In that moment, though, you could see Josh disassociating. So like every time you see those memories Josh was having, you could see him reliving the trauma, but it was just so subtly done with the way the music. And Adam Arkin's like, "Was it good?" And Josh goes, "It's Yo-Yo Ma." Of course it was. He changed his voice. And then it cuts to that scene where we see the flashback. But I would imagine in that scene, Josh's real brain was really cutting back to that moment. Yeah. And Stanley was probably just sitting there. Like I've had that experience where I'm just sitting there and having somebody watch me kind of go elsewhere.
With that 1,000-yard stare, they call it sometimes, right?
Yes. He did 1,000. Gosh. It was.
And that was something that I was curious what you thought about the ending. Now, the ending, obviously, Dr. Stanley.
Oh, it brought me to tears.
Yeah.
The stuff with Leo? Are you kidding me?
Oh, right. That's an important part of it, too. That's not where I was going, but let's do that first. Yeah, exactly. When he gives that story about the hole, he's like, somebody walks by and
a priest walks by. You're stuck in a hole. A priest walks by, like, "Hey, Father, I need help." They write down a prayer. They throw it down. They keep walking. A friend walks by, and then it gets me. I love it so much. And then
he says, "I've been in the hole before. I know how to get out," and jumps in the hole with you. Right.
Jumps in the hole with you. And says,
I think we did a pretty succinct job of telling that story.
Sure, but
take that, like, Aaron Sorkin. Our version was so much more smooth than yours.
It's like where I
told it like backwards and sideways.
Yeah, we work with peer specialists. My friend Adam, who's a peer specialist with me, and I've had other peer specialists who are wonderful. We love to death. But like I really think of like that's kind of their role within the job I work here. It's like he's like, and I was watching it with him this morning while we were working like in the background. I'm like, that explains your job. Like you jump down into people into like where I work, I'm working with people who are coming out of a psychiatric hospitalization, and like the peer's job is to kind of in a way jump down and be like, I've been here before. I know the way out. Yeah. That really sat with me. And the other line I quote that one, and there's a couple lines I quote a lot, but the other one too, when Stanley says 2 + 2 = a bushel of potatoes. I use that all the time to explain trauma.
Yes. So
and
one thing I thought was really powerful, you had that part where, he knows he's there for him. Donna, his assistant, also there for him.
Oh, Donna, tell him off. How do you not love their relationship?
And I think one of the great things, unless I completely remember, is they never have any kind of they don't have a romantic element in their relationship.
They do it later in the series.
Oh, they do? Oh, man.
Yeah.
Damn
it took forever. It should have been way sooner.
No, it's fine. But that's fine. But they didn't. Well, I don't know. I would say that it was actually better to have some friendship build up over time. You know.
Yeah, that's back. Yeah, that's a later season. It definitely should. They built towards it, and then nothing happened. And then when Aaron Sorkin left, the next person did it, and it was awesome. But yeah, that. But yeah, I love. Well, Donatella was the one to know that he was not well, and she was one of the first people to bring it to everyone's attention, and everyone acted with such grace, and even Toby, the dickhead. Like they all. I mean, that's what
he's obviously worried about him. Yeah.
Yeah, that shows what it's to be like. What you could do if you're around someone not doing well and you don't know what to do, just find someone else who can. And
by the way, one of the I know this is tangential, but they showcase this so well in this episode. This having grown up, I live in the West now, but I grew up in the East, and you're still there, and so there's this like wonderfully Eastern attribute that you run into, and that is summed up of people giving each other like a little bit of shit and a little bit of pushback, just kind of as a matter of course. And it is summed up so nicely when they're standing there, they're listening to the brass band, and Toby's like, "Do you like him?" And he's like, "No." And then he's like pushing back on Josh. But then all of a sudden, Toby just turns to these people who, I mean, this is like probably pinnacle of their life. You know, they're sitting in the White House playing this, and he's just like, would you stop playing for a minute? And then they have this discussion, and then they're walking away, and he's like, you can keep playing. And they do. And it's like, I think there's something just really, there's this East Coast kind of thing about that, of just kind of like, they were probably fine. They were like, okay, hey, we're playing here, you know? That kind of thing where just a moderate amount of push back and forth is like kind of normal there. And there's just other parts of the country where if you did that, people would just be like, what? Wow, you were being so aggressive.
Everyone I know who from different parts of the country or who I've met, who are in this part of the country will be like, yeah, everyone in New England's got a hard shell and then a soft gooey center, but it could take a lot to get to. It's true. You would think everyone's an asshole if you visited over here.
That's what people think. That is what people think. There's just a little bit, but there's this little bit of like, hey, what are you talking about? You got me. All right, come on.
I remember like the first time I traveled outside of like into the West, and like strangers just say hello to you. I'm like, what the fuck? What?
Like,
don't ever say hi to me in public.
Did you just wave at me from the sidewalk when I was driving by? What the, you know?
Yeah, like that stuff threw me for a loop.
Stop and think.
The other thing I know we have a hard out at one, but I have to bring up one of the things I didn't realize I got it from this episode, but I presented at Pachacacha, which is it's a global event where
say that
just
again.
For anyone listening. It's a
what was the name of that?
Pachacacha. It's a Japanese word. It started in Tokyo.
I thought that was the evolved form of Pikachu.
That's actually, I know it's the worst name, but it's a Japanese word. But it's
sorry,
it's a
that's really insensitive of me to make fun of it just because it's a different language. Right? Sorry,
canceled. If
I'm canceled. Damn it! By the Patreon subscribers are going to cancel me.
But I did my presentation. You know, kind of similar to the moth. I tell mine how the worst things in your life become the best, and it kind of interweaves the story of like around the time my mom got sick with cancer, and then the infertility and all the horrible stuff happened throughout the years, and that led up to PTSD and like the highs and lows of doing the podcast and why I quit because of the PTSD. But I remember like distinctly like writing it out and everything. And I remember my last line. I don't know why I couldn't figure out where it came. I just knew like I wanted my last line to be, and I did what we all do. We get better. And I didn't realize that was from West Wing. He says that. It's like,
he says we get better.
It's like, yeah. He's like, well, why? I'm not. Every time I hear sirens, I'm going to do that. He's like, no, because we get better. And I use that line every day at work to my clients. Every single day I say, we get better. I feel like I live by it.
I mean, it's a great thought. It's one of the things that sometimes when things are feeling extra bad, I think that hope is really all we can hang on to. And
it's as similar as this too shall pass. It's almost like that same AA saying, like, we get better. And I feel like I live, but I was like, but I didn't realize I got that from this episode.
That's fantastic. It is interesting how these things do stick with you if there is the good storytelling. One thing I wanted to highlight before we run out of time is the very, very end, where first of all, I like that they made it clear, at least to me, and I hope non-professionals pick up on this too. The purpose of what Josh was working on with Dr. Stanley McStanley they were not really doing therapy. What he was doing was he was assessing Josh's level of safety, because as soon as he decides he's not suicidal, he's not a danger to himself or others, I'm out. And then he says, but I'll send you some resources for therapy because you need to do therapy. And I liked that was there. And I think they delivered that even more powerfully when he and Donna are leaving to go get his hand patched up. They walk by a bell choir, and it shows, once again, he sees the bells, he disassociates. And this is where Bradley Whitford, his performance is genius, because without any dialogue at all, you can look at his face and you can see him go through the stages of, oh, I'm realizing that I'm disassociating now, but I'm still doing it. Does that make sense? Like, nobody says that, but he disassociates. And then at the same time, he kind of looks off to the other side like, oh, I get it. This is happening to me now. And it shows that it's still happening. It hasn't stopped, but he's aware now and he's going to get better. But he's not better yet, but he's on his way. And it kind of just goes back and forth. And I don't know how you do that with your facial expression.
Yeah, I know. It's incredible. The only comparable actor I've ever seen that was Griffin Newman in the first episode of the Amazon Tick.
Oh, really? Okay. I haven't seen that.
Oh, very good.
I did see the first episode. I don't remember this part. What did he do?
Yeah, like the whole episode. There's a period where he thinks that the tick is made up. So he's like, you could tell he thinks he's kind of losing his mind, and just his facial expression. Like, I remember I interviewed him. I talked to him about it. It was incredible. A really nice guy, but like, it was it's just his facial expressions of like, he was playing somebody who thought they had PTSD, but it's the tick. So obviously he didn't, because he was right. But before we knew the tick was real, he had to play it like Bradley Whitford. He had to play in 1,000-Yard Stare. Like, he had to play someone who had PTSD, who doesn't have PTSD. I thought he did a fantastic job. Huh. But anyway, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I thought that was, not only was that a brilliant acting and direction maneuver to do that, I also thought it was one of the more responsible episodes. That's why I think this is one of the most responsible episodes about mental illness that I've ever seen, because they end it with, yeah, I'm not done yet, but I'm getting better. And it didn't say, because so one of the big pet peeves that people like me often have, or people who, both, and I'm going to put myself in both camps, a therapist and someone who suffers with psychological illness and distress too. One of the things that is the most annoying is like the magic word or magic phrase that you get there, and it's like, you're healed now because you said it's not your fault. I mean, you and I have made fun of that before, even though Good Will Hunting is a good movie in lots of ways. That's like your and my catchphrase about this kind of stuff. Yeah. Is, it's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
Now I'm better. I'm healed.
Yeah. It's more of its awareness, and it's even just being aware was super helpful for me, because then I was able to get better slowly from that sense of like, it's also nice knowing what's happening to your body, and be like, even though when those things would happen to me again, I was like, oh, okay, I had like an awareness. Like I didn't stop it, but I was like, okay. And also had to be able to communicate more directly to the people surrounding me, so they didn't think it's like personal or something like that. It's the first step, is just acknowledgement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh God, what a beautiful episode. Like, on a storytelling level, on a cinematography level, like and it's Christmas, and then like there's the whole like the layer we get to look at it at, but it's near perfect.